inviting us, and thank you all for coming too. I know it's hectic and our lives are fast and we're always rushing to the next thing, but thank you for being here with us for this moment to see this work. So I'm John Hitchcock. I come from Oklahoma originally, the Lawton, Fort Sill area. My mother's side is Kiowa and Comanche people, and my dad is German and Dutch and Northern European from Michigan. So Oklahoma and Michigan meets at Fort Sill, Lawton. So my father ended up at Fort Sill originally in the Korean War. Met my mom, and then my brother, my sister, me, we came along. So that space, Fort Sill itself, is historic for its relationship to the tribal people that live there, particularly the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache people. St. Thide of the Kiowa people, who were descended from on my grandfather's side, and Quanah Parker from the Comanche people, and then you have Geronimo of the Apache people. They were all imprisoned at Fort Sill. And the drive for the people that ended up there, an earlier part of that was, it happened in Texas, Palo Duro Canyon. And General Mackenzie at the time had invaded a Kiowa, Comanche, and Cheyenne camp. And this was in, I think, 1874, and slaughtered and pushed, sorry, young ones, horses off the edge of a bank. And these 1,400 horses was the beginning of a movement of the Kiowa, Comanche, Cheyenne people to present day Oklahoma. And at that time, that's where the Comanches and Kiowas ended up at Fort Sill. And so we're the descendants of those people that came from that area. And so thinking about that in a more honoring and also celebratory way, I wanted to do work about this for a while, but I wanted to do this in a more, I guess, celebratory manner. And so this is honoring those horses, but also those tribes too, in a sense. So the work itself is a combination of these horse masks, and these horse masks are in reference to pageantry, current day, but also they were used in war and battle back in the 1800s as masks that went over the horses and as protection. And so the idea of protection, and I was thinking about masks during COVID and how that referenced itself. And then on the other end of that, the drawings of it started probably I've been drawing them since I was a little kid, but this was the beginning of the horse mask series, was at Crow Shadow. And Judith, the printmaker, the collaborative printer, was working with also Emily, and the week before, you were there the week before, and I came the week after, and I had these sketches. And so the beginning of the horse mask series, or the blanket songs work, started at Crow Shadow. So the print that's over here, that's the bright, there's one that's night and day, or winter birds and summer birds. And it's called A Shouting Lightning from Their Eyes. And I was thinking about the notion of how you have something to say, but how do you say that? And so in a sense, by vision and what you see. And also I had lost some vision from some health issues. And so I've been thinking about vision and its relationship. So that brings me back to the bright colors. And my grandmother was my kaku, is a Comanche grandmother, is a beadwork artist. And so I learned how to draw from her. I learned how to look at beadwork itself, because she would make a medallion, and then she would ask me to look at it, and she'd ask me to draw it. And then she would also say, I want you to go outside and look at the roses and the flower garden out by the house and draw from that. So I'd do some drawings from that. And then she'd ask me to think about both of those, and then I want you to use your imagination, make something up. So imaginative, the notion of that, the notion of observational drawing, and then thinking about color. She talked about there's night colors and day colors. And so the colors I'm using, I'm thinking about that in the work. And when she'd get ready to bead, she would just scatter her beads on the table, and they'd fly everywhere. And that's kind of what I see in these works here are the beads scattered on the table. So that's the references and reference to the beads, but they're also referencing the stars. And in that, I'm looking at, I even had a conversation with Tom once about beadwork in the work. And I'm like, Tom, you put beads in your work. I'm like, I can't, I'm a flat bead worker. You know, I got to put it on, I got to draw it on the paper because there's no way I could actually put that on the paper for me. But for me to draw that image, or at least have it as a reference. And so they're abstractions of that. The birds that I'm using are birds that are from Oklahoma. They're the state bird, the scissortail flycatcher. So you're seeing that throughout many of the works. You're seeing the beadwork images. And then back to the horses, my grandfather and grandmother, they had at one point in the late 60s over 30 head of horses. And when that time, I was born in 67, so I caught the tail end of that. And I only saw a couple of these horses, but digging through the family archives of photographs, I was moving studios a year ago, and I found this box full of photographs that I'd kept, and they were black and white images of horses, my brother with them, my grandfather, my sister. So that's where these images came from, and these horses. And I was asking my brother if he would be able to name, like, do you remember the names of them? Yahoo is the only one that I got from him text to me. And the rest, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna think about honoring. And how do you honor through song, and how do you, horse songs, and thinking in terms of that. I think this one's Issa Rosa, I think. Yeah, song for Issa Rosa, White Wolf. Issa Rosa is the White Wolf people, and it's the Comanche people. My grandmother is Pahaxacut, but she was taken in at that time by the Issa Rosa people. And the Issa Rosa are also Comanche people, but her father, Preston Pahaxacut, ended up at Carlisle Indian School. And so when she ended up with her other, family, their relatives, but they took her in and adopted her. And so she grew up with the Issa Rosa people. But during that time too, during the time that her father was at Carlisle, she was put in a boarding school, and that boarding school was Riverside Indian School in Anadarko. And so she would tell me stories about that time and what it was like for her. And something Tom brought up about the ribbon and the applique and the beadwork itself. She would always talk about the beadwork of the northern tribes because it had all this beautiful floral patterning. And it was gorgeous patterning. And she'd always talk about, that's what I want to do. And so, and she learned that from the boarding schools because she was with other tribal people from up north. And so that crossover and communication, and even I think of myself as an intercultural hybrid because I'm mixed. And so that mixture of that, and even mixture of culture, and I think of pan-Indianism and the effects of boarding schools and how it's affected our people from all these nations, from Canada all the way down, and how we have all these stories from it. And so for me, giving voice through a celebratory way, through these images, and using some of the visual indicators that I learned from my grandmother and my grandfather too. He was a drummer at the powwow drum, starting to kind of bring this type of imagery into this work. Ooh, I was talking a while, so I was thinking and going, and I'm like, okay, I gotta rethink here. Questions or thoughts?